Hello class, we're about to start section R3.2 Factoring Polynomials. We have example 1, factor out the greatest common factor. Now, the first thing we have to do is realize that we are going to factor out the greatest common factor from each of the terms that are listed. Now remember, terms are separated by addition or subtraction. So in example 1a, we have two terms, the 24x cubed and a minus 32x squared. So we look at the coefficients of 24 and 32. The greatest common factor of 24 and 32 is 8. Now we look at the variables. We have x cubed and x squared. Now looking at these variables here, if they have the same variable, if all terms have the same variable, we take the one with the lowest exponent as its greatest common factor. So that would be x squared. So we factor out 8x squared. Now we have to write these values in parentheses, what's left. So what you would do is you would take 8x squared and we would divide both of these terms by 8x squared. 24 divided by 8 is 3. X cubed divided by x squared is x. That took care of the first term. Negative 32 divided by 8 is a minus 4. And x squared divided by x squared will simplify out. So your final answer here is 8x squared times 3x minus 4. Now just to clean this up a little bit, close the parenthesis here. And this is your final answer. Now, we come here to B. We have three terms here. So first we will look at the coefficients, 12, 6, and 15. The greatest common factor of all three of these terms is 3. That's the only thing that they have in common aside from 1. Now we look at the variables. We have x to the 4th, x squared, and x. So all of them have an x. So we take the x with the lowest exponent, which would just be x. Now we look here at the y. We have y squared, y cubed, and y squared. All of them have y, and the y with the lowest exponent is y squared. Now, just like we did in the other problem, whatever is left will go inside this parenthesis. So we would divide all three of these terms by the 3xy squared. 12 divided by 3 is 4. X to the 4th divided by x is x cubed. Y squared divided by y squared, they will simplify out. Now we go to negative 6 divided by 3 is a minus 2. X squared divided by x is x. Y cubed divided by y squared is y. Now we go to the 15. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So it'd be plus 5. The x's simplify out and the y squared simplify out. And this is your final answer. Now, are there any questions? All right, example 2. We have factor by grouping. Okay, now, if you notice here in A, we have 4 terms here. So when they want us to factor by grouping, we group by 2. So we would group the first 2 terms, and then we would group the last 2 terms. And we would take their greatest common factor. 10 and 6 greatest common factor is 2. And we look at the variables. X cubed and x squared will give us x squared. We would do a parenthesis. 10 divided by 2 is 5. X cubed divided by x squared is x. Next, we have negative 6 divided by 2, which is a minus 3. And the x squares will simplify out. So we took care of the first grouping of 2. Now we look at the last grouping. We have a positive 5x and a negative 3. If you notice, they have nothing in common. No variables, and a coefficient doesn't have anything except for a positive 1 in common. So we will put positive 1, and in parentheses, we will put the 5x minus 3. Now, if you notice, we have 2 parentheses that match up here. So what we would do is this. We will write one of the matching parentheses, which would be 5x minus 3. And then everything that's left on the outside will go in the other parenthesis. And that is the final answer. Now, one other thing I want to stress here is this. you could have written the 2x squared plus 1 first, and then the 5x minus 3 second. It still would be the same answer. Okay, now B. We grouped the first two. We could factor out a 2, and then x cubed and x squared, we could factor out an x squared. Now in the parenthesis here, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and x cubed divided by x squared is x. So you know it's 1x or just x. Negative 8 divided by 2 is a minus 4, and the x squares will simplify out. Now we look here at the other two that we have to factor out. Now, whenever you're dealing with the second set of 2 that you have to factor out, if the first value is negative, whatever you factor out must be negative. That's only if the first term is negative of the second set. Now, if you notice here, we had negative 3x and 12. They both have a negative 3 in common. Negative 3x divided by negative 3 will leave x. And 12 divided by negative 3 will leave a minus 4. Now, we would take one of the two matching parentheses, which would be x minus 4. Then the other parenthesis, we'll write everything that's left. Are there any questions over example 2A and B? Okay, now we go down here to example 3A. Now we have x squared minus 13x minus 30. Now, I told you all before that we need to list this as A, B, and C. But before we list what A is, B is, and C is, we need to see what we can factor out. Do all three of these terms have anything in common aside from positive 1? No, they don't. So now we can factor out our A, B, and C for the trinomial. A is always the coefficient of the variable squared, which would be 1 here. B is always the coefficient of the variable to the first power, which would be negative 13. And C is always the constant, the number without the variable. So now we have our A, B, and C. Now what we would do next is this here. We would multiply A and C together. So we would take, and I'm going to write it up here for lack of space. We would take A times C, which would give us 1 times a negative 30, which is negative 30. Okay, so now we're dealing with the number negative 30. So we need to find all the factors of negative 30. So why don't we do this? Instead of doing the factors of negative 30, let's just do the factors of 30 first. So it'll be 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. Now if you notice here, I put all the lower numbers first and all the higher numbers second, so it will be uniform. Okay, now, we know that these are the factors of positive 30, but we want the factors of negative 30. And we know in order to get the factors of negative 30, in each one of these sets of factors, one of them must be negative. Does everyone follow that? And this is how you determine which one is negative and which one is positive. You look at B. If B is negative, that means that all of your larger numbers are negative. If B was positive, that means that all of your higher numbers would be positive, or all of your lower numbers would be negative. So we'll make all of our higher numbers negative. So it'll be negative 30, negative 15. That looks like a 75. Let me erase that real quick. Okay. So we know this will be a negative 15. That'll be a negative 10. And then that'll be a negative 6. Now what we have to do next is this here. We need to add these values up. And whichever one gives us negative 13, those are the two factors we will use. This is negative 29. This is negative 13. We can stop here. So we need to use 2 and negative 15. So we will replace the negative 13 with positive 2x minus 15x minus 30. Does everyone follow that? Now, this technically goes back to what we did. Oh, I guess it went up a little too far. What we did here in example 2a. Remember we have 4 terms here, and we grouped them. We have, after we factor, we have 4 terms here. So we would group them. We group the first 2. We can factor out an x, and that will leave us x plus 2. We group the second 2. Negative 15x minus 30. Since that first term is negative, whatever we factor out must be negative. We could factor out a negative 15. And that will leave us x plus 2, just like we did in the previous problems. So one of our parentheses would be x plus 2. The other would be x minus 15. And we are done with that problem. Now, we go to B here. We have 2w to the 4 plus 4w cubed minus 8w squared. Now, I'm going to draw a little line here to let you know that this is not part of B, what I'm about to write. Okay, now, the first thing, and I should have said this the last time, I listed the A, B, and C first, but let me go back through this. First thing, we should look and see if we can factor anything out first before we even list the A, B, and C. So now, we look here at the coefficients. We can factor out a 2. We look here at the variables. We can factor out a w squared. It's just like the problems we previously did. So that would leave us w squared plus 2w minus 4. Now, what we need to do next is look inside this parenthesis to see if we can factor this. So we will list our A, B, and C. A would be 1, B would be 2, and C would be negative 4. So now we know we will multiply A times C, which would give us 1 times negative 4, which is negative 4. Now what we want to do is take the factors of 4, but we know we're going to make it negative. So it'll be 1 and 4, and 2 and 2. So now we look at the middle value, the B. The B is positive, so that means the lower numbers would be negative. So when we add these together, this would give us 3, this would give us 0. None of these equal to B, right? So then that means that this is totally factored. We can't do anything else with this. So we're done. Now we go here to C. We have negative 6 minus 8 plus 5t squared. The first thing we should do here is put this in the correct order. So, with the correct order, this is what I mean. We will have to put it in descending order. So the variable with the highest exponent goes first, then the next variable, then the value without the variable. Now we look here at each term. They have nothing in common. So we will list our A, B, and C. A is 5, B is negative 6, and C is negative 8. Now we know we multiply our A and C. I'm going to use some of this blank space here, so I won't, mess up the problem here. So we have A times C, which would be 5 times a negative 8, which is negative 40. Now, with this negative 40, we need to find all of the factors of 40. Let's see if I can scroll down a little bit. So the factors of 40 are 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, and 5 and 8. Well, we know this is a negative 40. And since B is negative, we know that all of our larger numbers are negative. So this would be a negative 40, a negative 20, a negative 10, and a negative 8. So now we add them together and see which one of them would give us negative 6. This is negative 39, negative 18, negative 6. So that's positive 4 and negative 10. So we substitute that in for the negative 6t. So we have 5t squared plus 4t minus 10t minus 8.